You know, how often in our line of work do we see grieving parents and you know, and understandably inconsolable, and there she was. It was impressive.
When I heard what she said today, it touched my heart, and I turned around and I said, you hit the message. That was it right there.
Yeah. The conversation about what happened in Charlottesville really dominates the headlines these days.
Along with the backlash over the Confederate statues and the symbols, this is what we're talking about tonight at 6:30.
So let's bring in our panel tonight. You know Niall Stanage, White House columnist for The Hill. Derrick Parks, a former law enforcement officer and president and CEO of Metropolitan Protective Services. And Dr. Michael Fauntleroy, political science professor at Howard University. I want to start off with something. This just came down about 15 minutes ago. Governor Terry McAuliffe had said, when it comes to Confederate symbols in the Commonwealth of Virginia, he's urging localities to start that discussion now. He wants them to move all of these monuments to museums or other appropriate venues. Are you surprised that we see the governor coming out with a statement like this?
I'm not. I think that the general mood is shifting on this issue, and we've seen before how it can shift very fast on issues like the Confederate flag as well as these statues. I think the argument that it's about heritage rings increasingly hollow to a lot of people. It's a heritage that seems based upon support for slavery, and that's obviously a problem. So I'm not that surprised, no.
Michael, let me ask you, is there a place for these statues, for these symbols somewhere in our country? We don't see statues to Hitler or to the Nazis over in Germany. Where do these belong?
On photographs, maybe. There's a part of me that likes the idea of museums. There is an educational component to this, but the idea that they need to be in public spaces or in college campuses or in communities around the country makes no sense.
But how do you respond to the critics who say, but this is a part of history, and if you take it away, you're erasing it?
There's no erasure of history. History is what it is. The question is, are we going to tell the part of the history that you like or the entire part of the history? You know, there are many parts of this country where students are reading textbooks that misplay or underplay the full extent of slavery, for example. And that's history, and they don't want to talk about that. So you can talk about it in terms of history, but history is a much bigger story than the one they want told.
As we bring Derrick into the conversation, so we're seeing this response in different towns. I think back to South Carolina and the Confederate flag at the State House. And you look at the policing issues here. How do these towns deal with, you know, the influx of people who are going to come down and they're going to protest, they're going to rally in support of keeping these monuments in place? I mean, how do towns and municipalities gear themselves up for this inevitable battle?
Based on this last scenario that just transpired over the weekend, I mean, I think all law enforcement really have to sit down and reevaluate the way that they deal with this. They had a very strong, this is the first time that they had 6,000, lack of a better word, Klansmen march in years, right, in decades. So no police agency was really ready for that. I think, realistically, I think it's going to have to do with a lot of intel and a lot of recon that these police departments are going to have to do with each agency and a county agency or counter groups that plan on coming to protest or coming to do a demonstration.
Now, let's talk about the latest from the White House today. What has been the fallout? We know we saw the president disband some of the councils and boards that he had because the CEO were resigning. But what about reaction from other lawmakers? What about reaction from folks inside the administration?
The reaction from other lawmakers has been very negative and almost universally so. It has crossed party lines. We've had Mitch McConnell and other Republicans being very critical. Both Presidents Bush released a joint statement that were also critical. There has been some suggestion of resignations from the administration, but we haven't seen that come to fruition yet. One of my sources was saying that, you know, this administration has been through so many of these firestorms. There's an acceptance, for right or wrong, of a lot of controversial things the president has said. Will this be a bridge too far? Maybe not.
We have about a minute left, but I'm curious, Dr. Fauntleroy, as we look at the response and the conversation that we need to have as a country, I think there's no doubt we have to have some sort of conversation. What should we be focusing on?
We ought to be focusing on truth. There are some people who seem to believe the social and political equivalent to 2 + 2 is 5. And as a result, they are willing to accept as fact things that are demonstrably false. And so that has to be dealt with. This is our sort of first generation of young people who are coming up reading textbooks that aren't really telling the truth in many parts of the country. So you got to start there. The other part of it is people of goodwill have to stand up and speak up. For far too long, the president and people of his ilk and people who protested in Charlottesville have sort of controlled the narrative over the space of the last few years. And those of us who see it differently need to speak up and say so. Otherwise, this will continue.
All right, gentlemen, just in closing here, if you could say something, let me ask you, Derrick, to President Trump, to the administration, or to folks about how this has been handled. Would you tell them to look at the way the situation was handled in Baltimore, the way the mayor handled it there? Is that the way we should see things move going forward?
I think one of the first things is we have to, they have to acknowledge that the South lost. They took arms against the United States, and they were enemy combatants. And so we can't celebrate that. We have to move on from it, and I think we have to leave the past in the past and just move forward.
Okay. Michael, you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, quickly, I would just say...
She took out the statues overnight while people were asleep. Was that
yes,
a good idea?
I really like the quickness on that.
Okay.
But we also have to understand that in some parts of the country, that's easier to do than in others.
Yeah.
All right, you can do that in Baltimore.
Right.
You can't do that in Birmingham.
Right. Yep. Niall, I'll give you the final word here.
We always talk about having a conversation on these issues. The people who we saw in Charlottesville believe that 3 people in this group here would be inferior to another 2 because of the color of their skin. That can't stand in the United States of America.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much.
I think that's how you leave it.
Yep, absolutely.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Now, Derrick Parks, Michael Frantre, thank you all for coming in tonight.
Thanks.
Thank you.